Hello, everybody. Let me tell you about Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. He's bad as they come, far super left. He allowed the city of St. Paul and Minneapolis to burn down to the ground on the George Floyd lie.
And as a woman, there's a balance to be struck between being tough and being a bitch. Turn that off.
But I do want to talk about Tim Walz because, my God, my very first story at Fox News, very young cub reporter, was Swift Boat Veterans for Truth coming after John Kerry and his misrepresentations about his military service.
Newly minted vice presidential pick Tim Walz, who's the governor of Minnesota, is being put on blast for stolen valor and leaving his unit hanging when they got the order to deploy to Iraq. He declined to deploy with them, okay?
Anyway, Alpha News vetted Tim Walz hard back in 2018 when he was trying to elevate from congressman to governor, and he did it successfully. And here's the headline: former National Guardsman, Tim Walz is misleading the public about his time in service.
So this is from an article that came out in the West Central Tribune in 2018. This article was authored by people that served with Governor Tim Walz that were putting him on blast for basically stolen valor and leaving his unit hanging when they decided they were going to deploy to Iraq.
Walz often refers to his military service as he campaigns for governor. However, former members of the Minnesota National Guard are raising concerns over the discrepancies in his story, saying he's misleading the public about it.
I'm going to read you the first sentence of this. We, retired Command Sergeants Major of the Minnesota National Guard, feel it is our duty and responsibility to bring forth the truth as we know it concerning his service record.
Tim Walz has embellished, this is a quote, and selectively omitted facts and circumstances of his military career for years, said Thomas Behrens, a retired Command Sergeant Major for the Minnesota National Guard.
Now, I'm not going to get all into the weeds on this, but the most important part is this. All right. In early 2005, a warning order was issued to the 125th Field Artillery Battalion, in which Governor Walz was serving as their command sergeant major, okay? The order was to prepare them to be mobilized for active duty at deployment to Iraq. When you are about to deploy, you generally have a couple of months notice, okay? Because there's a lot of things that go into getting a unit ready to go to war.
Walz, 54, this is back in 18, joined the Army National Guard when he was 17, completing 20 years of service. And then in 2001, just days after 9/11, Walz re-enlisted in the Minnesota Army National Guard. He then retired 4 years later in 2005, ostensibly to run for Congress. Okay, so far we're wondering what's wrong with any of this. Behrens says Walz did serve a long and honorable career, but it is his story surrounding his service post 9/11 that raises red flags. The discrepancies start with how long he re-enlisted for.
Now, on May 16, 2005, he quit, leaving the 125th Field Artillery Battalion and its soldiers hanging without its senior non-commissioned officer. His excuse was that he needed to retire in order to run for Congress. This is false. And again, these are the words of the Command Sergeant Major, retired, that put this together for the West Central Tribune. This came out in 2018.
According to his report of separation of military service, Walz re-enlisted for 6 years. 6 years, not 4, as he claimed. And his service obligation was not complete until September 2007, which was after his unit was deployed and went. The allegation is that he got out of military service. He did not want to go to Iraq. And then he lied about the circumstances around it. Here is Tom Behrens, who I mentioned just a moment ago, speaking about this.
Now, according to a DOD directive, he could have run and requested permission from the department, from the Secretary of Defense, before entering active duty, as many reservists have, okay? You can probably ask Tulsi Gabbard about that, because she did not abandon her unit when it came time to deploy. I believe Tulsi deployed.
In 2006, as Walz was amid his first campaign for Congress, questions were raised about the timing of his retirement. You see, Walz's sudden retirement after learning that his unit would be deployed to Iraq is what is under scrutiny. He allegedly re-enlisted for another 6 years, which would have taken him well past the time of being they were trying to deploy him. He would have had to stay. He would have had to go and be deployed. And suddenly he got out of it a couple of years early. And what they say is that he quickly retired after learning that his unit, Southern Minnesota's 1-125 FA Battalion, would be sent to Iraq. For Tim Walz to abandon his fellow soldiers and quit when they needed experienced leadership most is disheartening, and it dishonors those brave American men and women who did answer the nation's call and continue to serve, fight, and unfortunately die in harm's way.
The point is this: you have to understand that this person is unfit to lead. He is not only unfit to be the vice president, he is unfit to run around talking about his military service as something that is positive when he was promoted to the position of command sergeant major for a unit and he decided to take the punk way out, all right, and say that he had to quote unquote retire to run for Congress instead of deploying to Iraq. What does that say about his military service? What does that say about what he thinks about his military service? What does that say about what he thought about his unit? What does that say about what he thinks about his country? What does that say about how he is going to approach his job as the vice president should Kamala Harris be elected and the United States of America is involved in yet another foreign conflict?
The governor, or the then congressman, came out and defended this report at the time, saying, after completing my 20 years in 2001, I re-enlisted to serve for an additional 4, right, which would have taken him to 2005. And I retired the year before my battalion was deployed in order to run for Congress. Then Alpha News goes on. However, official documents from the National Guard contradict that story.
To me, he is unfit to serve, unfit to lead, and anybody who would leave their unit hanging in this way upon notice of deployment is a fundamentally weak man, a weak individual, and somebody that we should not be elevating to any position of power.
Vice President Kamala Harris has decided to select Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate for the upcoming November election against former President Donald Trump. Now, this announcement was made by Kamala Harris through an Instagram post and a text message to her supporters. In her message, Kamala Harris praised Tim Walz for his dedication to the middle-class families and highlighted his background, including his service to the National Guard and his experience working as a teacher, trying to make the guy seem even more relatable. We'll see about that. Now, Kamala Harris, she's been under fire lately for a lot of information that's been going on in her background, secret relationships and couch casting and the likes. All sorts of dirt has been coming out about her. She needs to kind of image. Now, Kamala Harris expressed her admiration for Tim Walz's impressive background and emphasized how his experiences have shaped a record. She also mentioned her deep respect for Tim Walz's commitment to his family, including his wife, Gwen, and their children, Gus and Hope. Now, Kamala Harris mentioned that she and her husband, Doug, they're looking forward to collaborating with Tim Walz and his family to build an administration that reflects their shared values. Now, I'll be honest with you guys, hopefully, Vice President Kamala Harris's VP pick won't even matter against former President Donald Trump in the 2024 presidential elections. In her messages, Kamala Harris conveyed her excitement about forming a strong partnership with Tim Walz. She emphasized that together they will create a great team and win this election. Me personally, I honestly think that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are just going to go ahead and mop the floor with these two folks. But I figured I'd go ahead and let you guys know what is really going on, as this is breaking news. Tim Walz, who is 60 years old, was initially considered as an unexpected choice for the vice presidential slot. Early decisions and discussions about presidential or potential running mates focused on other high-profile figures. She was initially looking at Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, which I'm really shocked that she didn't pick him. Arizona Senator Mark Kelly. But Tim Walz gained a lot of attention recently, especially after a widely received cable news interview where he criticized some Republicans, calling them weird. Now, this line of attack was later adopted by National Democrats. This just shows how weak the Democratic strategy is. They're looking at Donald Trump and they're calling J.D. Vance and Donald Trump weird. Really? So you have Democratic strategists being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, to come up with an amazing strategy for Democrats to win over the votes of the American people. And the best that they can come up with is a campaign around the word weird. Someone needs to be fired. Now, the selection of Tim Walz came after a very fast-paced 2-week period that saw significant changes in the political landscape. We saw President Joe Biden had decided not to run for re-election. He dropped out of the presidential campaign. So Joe Biden has officially dropped out, leading, or by default, by de facto, leading Kamala Harris to consolidate her support within the Democratic Party and become the presumptive Democratic nominee. But during this period, Kamala Harris and her team quickly evaluated potential running mates, ultimately choosing Tim Walz. Now, Kamala Harris, her choice of Tim Walz, it kind of received some praise from both progressives and moderate Democrats. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, she expressed a lot of support on her social media platform on X, essentially stating that Kamala Harris made an excellent decision and that together she and Walz will govern effectively and boldly for the American people. Of course, AOC is going to support her on this. They're on the same team. Representative Lloyd Doggett from Texas also commended Tim Walz, describing him as a solid and decent former colleague with a good sense of humor and highlighting his background as a former teacher and veteran who represented a Minnesota district typically held by Republicans. What do y'all think about this? By the way, if you haven't already, do hit the like button, support the channel, get the message out here, folks. Thank you so much for subscribing to the channel. You guys are absolutely amazing.